Welcome back to Cards and Comics, and today in my hobby talk video, I want to talk about something that I've always you know been questioning and thinking about ever since I was a kid and collected. Now, I just did a video on my journey into collecting and how I started, and the idea of experts and who's an expert and what makes someone an expert is just something I want to talk about. But before I do that, I want to thank two content creators who've been shouting me out in their videos. Really appreciate it. Ziggy No shouted me out on June 8th and has talked about me before, and I actually appeared on his channel one time before. And I've actually only appeared in one other person's channel. So I've only been on Ziggy's channel. I've never been asked to be on anyone else's channel. And I don't know really how to do that. Like, am I supposed to ask to be on channels? And I don't do lives very often because I don't really have the setup yet. I need to get some better equipment, I think, to do that. But I don't know how to ask people, or what's the protocol for asking people to come on to your own channel. And I think with my subscriber count, I don't think I'd have a lot of takers on people wanting to come onto my channel, because I'm probably not going to help them grow their channel by coming on my channel. So I would love to talk to people. It's just not been in the cards yet for my channel, and I think maybe I'll get some more opportunities in the future. Would love to do that. Second channel that I want to talk about is Dustin, Sports Card Dad. Shouted me out in one of his channels about sports card collectibles are not stocks. And this goes about my video I did where I calculated Kagers for kind of a fake sports card index I created to just see how the card growth was prior to the 2020 boom and then after, and kind of get an idea of what to expect for the next 5 years. If you look at average rate of growth before and after the boom. And that was the point of the video. And just to show that, there's a lot of other factors that affect sports cards other than, the fact that it's a sports card. That alone isn't the only factor. Condition, eye appeal, popularity of the player. I mean, there's a lot of factors, right? So that was the point of the video, and he captured it very well, and I really appreciate him. And he has commented on videos before, so and I've contacted him on Instagram before, so it's great that he's a really good guy, and I love going on to the idea of what an expert is, right? And if you just do the typical YouTube search and look for videos about sports card experts, you get kind of crazy, videos like the first one from Bloomberg, how this expert sold a card for $3.9 million, but they're showing them open up like 2020 tops. It's typical crazy crap journalism that you get about the hobby, where they don't understand the difference between cards, and they just think all cards are either really expensive or they're crap. Like you either get all cards are going up, or what happened to the card industry, it's all going to zero again. You get those stories. Or someone's broke into someone's store. That's the three stories you get about sports cards. Pawn Stars, whatever. Breakout card saying, expert gives tips on avoiding spam. He's calling himself an expert. You just got... you click down, how he earns millions selling sports cards. For you get Jake Roy, 90s basketball card expert. So the idea of what makes an expert, in this hobby, and my take on this is going to go in a weird direction, because this is kind of how I thought about it originally. Was we value people's opinion in this hobby if they are someone who, let's say, only focuses on one area, right? And it happens quite a lot because, in the hobby, I started out, in the community aspect, on PSA boards, Net 54, Beckett a little bit, but then I moved on to Freedom Cardboard, Blowout, all the typical sports card forums that you would normally go on, right? From the 90s, late 90s, all the way to now. And the idea is, in those forums, anywhere you have a community, you have a hierarchy of people who they think are experts. So collector A or person A is an expert because of whatever, or that's what the community deems that person because of some factor. And I've looked at it, and the factor that always comes up the most is basically that they're dedicated to one area of collecting. And so that guy's the expert because that's all he collects. And, the problem I have with it is that, it really ignores people who collect a lot of different things. And, for my personal side of it, since I do cards and comics, I get told. I mean, I've had people tell me on YouTube, Instagram, and different areas that, like, you don't know what you're doing because you collect comic books or you collect sports cards or Marvel cards. Since you do all of that, you can't be an expert in any of those things because you collect more than one thing. And I think that is somewhat true. I don't, in terms of what people think. I think we always trust the person who has dedicated their entire collecting hobby to one thing, and or has the best collection. Now, that's the part that I really don't like. The idea that the guy with the best collection knows the most. Because, in all honesty, anyone with a lot of money can go out and put a amazing collection together in a month if they had the money and the ability to go out and just spend it as fast as possible. You could literally build a vintage collection, a Mickey Mantle collection, a Michael Jordan collection overnight, and be one of the best collections on PSA's registry or whatever. You could just buy a registry set. I want to be in the top 5 for let's say Nolan Ryan. I just go and offer the number 3 or 4 guy or number 2 guy a bunch of money, and now I'm number 2. I'm number 3, and I did it in one day. I didn't do any research. I didn't figure out what the hardest cards were to find. I just bought a collection, and now I'm number 2. That, to me, is not what I consider an expert. But going back to the idea that if you collect more than one type of thing, you can't be an expert. I just feel like, the hobby doesn't like people who aren't specialists in terms of calling them experts. Like, we can't wrap our heads around the idea that if someone collects Ken Griffey Jr. cards and Michael Jordan cards, that they could be an expert on both. They have to be one or the other. You can't be a comic book guy and a Marvel card guy and a sports card guy and know enough about all those markets to be an expert. It's like we can't wrap our head around it. And I think it's because if you look at it, I'll throw some guys out there like, Rudy and Magic. You look at him and you say, like, he doesn't do anything else. But then when you look at him, like, well, he does Pokemon and Magic and, a bunch of other card games as well. And, MetaZoo. And so, like, he doesn't just do one thing. You may say it's all collectible card game stuff, but he does more than one thing. Now, I don't find that, collectors feel that way as much as I would say people who want to, bring someone forward and say, this guy's an expert. I'm going to put him on my channel. I'm going to talk to him or whatever. I'm going to interview this person. In that case, they always want to find the guy with either the best collection or somehow has built a brand for himself as the expert, right? So they'll have a handle name of like I'm, Ken Griffey Jr. Expert 24 or something like that on YouTube or somewhere. and all they show is Griffey cards, and so everyone's like, well, that's the guy. He obviously knows the most. And then he gets interviewed, and it's just like, well, there's a lot of people who know a lot of things about this, and I think we should be open to listening to everyone, because everyone who collects and has spent time in the hobby, to a certain extent, has some experience that any one of us can learn from. And we don't need to just listen to the guy who has the most expensive cards, or the guy who has been in it the longest. I don't believe in people who, just because they collect for a long time, they're experts. I know a lot of people who've collected for a long time who haven't put any real thought into it. They just buy a card and that's it. They don't research pop counts or do a lot of background. They just like, hey, I like cards and I buy them. And they don't want to be experts. They don't want to be, make this a hobby where they spend a lot of time researching, because it's supposed to be fun. They just buy cards and build a collection, complete sets. But there's a lot of people who do care about the history of the cards, the players, the value, the manufacturers, the nuances of the set, condition issues, errors of the set, variations that have occurred, and those folks are experts, and to talk to the real ones is a lot of fun. And that's what I enjoyed about the PSA boards, and that's what I enjoyed about Blowout when it was good. And sometimes Blowout's not great, but Net 54 was definitely that way for a long period of time. That you had people who truly understood those areas of collecting that they were in, and you could ask them questions and get good answers, right? I don't think YouTube is set up that way. I don't think you could go on YouTube and find a T206 expert, or a candy card expert, or a non-sports card pre-war expert, very easily on YouTube, and be like, yeah, that's the guy. I think those guys are still elsewhere. Honestly, in the hobby, a lot of times the hobbyists who've been in it the longest, unfortunately, know who the experts are. And sometimes it's hard to find it out if you're new. And I think it would be great, and I think, maybe I'm doing a bad job of promoting the people who truly are experts in some areas in the hobby. In some cases, they don't want to be promoted. That's another thing, is like they're very happy. A lot of them that I know that I consider experts are very happy just to do what they're doing, share their knowledge, but want to be low key about it. They don't want to have a face on YouTube. They don't want to be the person, talking like I am. They're just like, hey, I love cards, and if you ask me a question, I'll answer it. I'm on a chat board, but that's about it. But funneling those people to those folks to get the real answers sometimes for questions is important, because I do feel like there's a lot of bad information that goes on the hobby. I'll just give some examples, because I feel like when I see a lot of videos on YouTube about, let's say, 93 finest refractors, and they quote the it's like 286 or whatever the number, 255. I don't even remember anymore, because it doesn't matter anymore. It's been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that estimation of the amount of 93 finest refractors is wrong. And it's been wrong for a long time. People have just understood, based on the grading pop reports, the amount of cards people have been able to accumulate of one player, over time. It just, there's more cards than what's been published, right? The stated print run. But if you go on YouTube, you'll hear that number over and over and over on Instagram, and it's just because people either don't care to find the real information, or they're trying to pump up something, to really hype a card. And it just doesn't really help the hobby to have all that bad information out there. But the thing that I think about sometimes when I think about people not wanting to talk to the true experts, is because we love myth in this hobby. We like things to be mythical and not real. We like to think rating truly matters. We like to think that every card but mine's been trimmed. We like to think that I won't get scammed. I'm the one person in the world who didn't never get shill bitted, or nobody trimmed my cards before I bought them. Everything I own is pristine and never been touched. We like to believe in the myth because the myth makes us feel good. And if we talk to the real experts, the people who know things, they don't like that, because then they're having to readjust their mindset around what they've always believed. I'll give another example, because I don't want to pick on him, but because I think he does a good job. But Breakout Cards, he was on a video with Ziggy where he talked about something around T206 cards, and I made the comment in my appearance that there's no such thing as a PSA 8 or PSA 9 T206 card. If you talk to any of the experts on tobacco cards, pre-war cards, but specifically T cards, the condition that we know as PSA 8 and 9 just can't exist for T cards, because of just everything that those cards went through in storage, and just how things happen in those days, that the amount of 8s and 9s that's been found and graded is just not real. The conclusion is that those cards that are graded that way, for the most part, have been trimmed, colored, stretched, then trimmed, rebacked, whatever you want to do to those cards to make them 8s and 9s. That's what's been done. That was my point, that there's no such thing as 8s and 9s. So my point, what I said was, if I was going to buy a card from two sets, the T206 set or the 48 leaf set, I wouldn't buy anything above a 5, because anything above a 5 in those sets is a good chance they've been altered because of just those sets and how it's easy to alter those cards, because the sizing rules were different for those cards. PSA accepts them for a long period of time. Maybe they've tightened it down, but a much larger tolerance in those card sizes. So the trimmers had an easier time getting things through, and I would rather buy a 4 or a 3. And his response was, well, those cards can be altered too. So I don't think that's true. I'm like, it's not what my point was. My point was that if you don't want to get ripped off, don't buy PSA 8 cards from T206 or the 48 leaf set, because those cards have been proven over and over to be altered, especially the 48 leaf cards recently with visual evidence. Like, you go to the blowout thread about cards that's been altered. It's full of 48 leaf cards, both football and baseball. And that was my point, is the real information that should be out there is, hey, beware of grades above a certain point for those cards, because they're most likely altered. And his point was, oh, they can be altered. Any card can be altered. I'm like, you're not giving the right information. And that was sort of what, and I feel like that's because, honestly, he hasn't been around long enough and hasn't talked to enough of those collectors and seen enough of those cards to really know what you should avoid and what tips you should give. I think, again, the idea of being an expert also sometimes, and believe me, I'm a scientist, so I haven't really given a lot of my background to folks, but I'm a scientist, and the one thing that's really bad about scientists is that we can't ever admit that we're wrong, because we're not supposed to be wrong. We're supposed to have the answers as a scientist. That's one of the key fallacies that most scientists have, is we can't really admit we're wrong. What we do instead, and just so you know this, is we won't actually ever give you a true answer. We'll say something like, well, based on these factors, or if under these conditions, or if the conditions change, this could change. Like, we give you a bunch of like scenarios versus an actual just answer, right? And that's because we're covering all the bases, because it's true, most conditions do determine what could happen. So you can't just be empirical and say this is, X, Y, and Z always will happen this way. But it's also because we don't like to be wrong, so we hedge and we just kind of say, yeah, we don't really know. But if this or that happens, and maybe this could be true, right? But there is this idea, if you're touting yourself as an expert, then you have to give answers, and you don't like to be wrong, but you can't also say I don't know. And as we look at the card hobby, I trust the folks who say I don't know a heck of a lot more. In fact, when I talk to other scientists, and if a scientist just says, hey, I don't really know, we don't have enough data, I'm like, you're high five. You gave me the right answer, because the talk around the answer versus saying like, I just don't have enough data to say yes or no, that's the better answer. And I think in terms of like sports cards and hobby, we hear a lot of answers for questions that really are just, we don't know. Like, what's the future of hobby going to bring? We don't really know. What are cards going to bring? Well, I can give you some trends and some data, but if you want to know what card A is going to do in 2 days, that's impossible for anyone to know, right? And so we just have to understand, like, if we're going to go out and talk about experts and people in this hobby as being experts, what's the standard that we're going to hold them to, and what information do we feel like that they can actually really give answers to that we can trust? And so, I think we should be thinking about that a little bit. We should also, think about, it's not just, YouTubers or people on message boards, but honestly, the people we trust the most are the graders and the people who are supposed to be kind of the shepherds of the industry, the Paninis, the Fanatics, the Goldens, PSA, and all these companies. And I think right now the issue in the hobby really is, as we kind of think about it, is the experts, the gatekeepers are kind of failing us to a certain extent. And that hurts the hobby more than anything else. And the reason why this hobby, again, isn't taken as seriously as other hobbies, or like, let's say fine art, is because we've never fixed some of those issues with the gatekeeper. So I think we all should just remain skeptical of anyone who calls himself an expert. And I think there are people out there who could be considered experts, but they're probably not promoting themselves as much as some other folks. So, let's just think about it. Think about what it takes. What's the criteria for someone to be an expert, and what's the gatekeepers doing to become experts? What are they doing to keep their knowledge up, and how transparent are they being about it? So that's it. That's just my little spiel about experts in the hobby and who can be an expert. And obviously, I am not an expert, because I definitely don't have the YouTube views or the collection to back up the expert status. So take it with a grain of salt, and I'll see you next time on Cards and Comics. Bye.